I kind of flipped the question around and said, let's not try and be as predictable as possible. Let's actually flip it around and say, I want to make the worst, most unpredictable project I possibly can.
If I was going to make the worst possible project, I would have a project that is constantly in flux in scope. That way, you could never run out a long-term forecast for it. You're dumping scope into the system. That's creating change as people have to go back through the schedule revision. And then system information, you don't set up the rules. So like when you're talking about calendars, typically an overarching system information, you would set up, here's our 5-day calendar, our 4-day calendar, our 60-hour, 40-hour, 50-hour calendars. That can even get into schedule levels as well too, in my opinion. Like what level is the schedule going to be used at and where? Because you can get, if I wanted to make a really bad schedule, I would have it be like an L4, L5, and P6, and then I'd hire like 2 schedulers to manage it. That'd make a really great schedule. Here's like 150,000 activities, 2 people, go. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah Piippo, and I'm a planning and scheduling manager for Intel.
And my name is Greg Lawton. I'm the CEO of an AI schedule management company called Nodes and Links.
Each show is designed to give you tactics and strategies that you can use right away. Today, we're going to have just a little conversation on predictability and different sorts of analysis that you can do to improve project predictability. Greg, do you want to kick us off and talk a little bit about how we stumbled on this topic today?
Sure. So this week, I was having some conversations with some companies that I can't name, but everyone will be familiar with the names, on the billions that they're investing in the capital assets that they're building right now. And someone said something to me, which was, the last time we actually tried to spend as much money as we were about to spend, we lost 2 CEOs because of the poor performance and predictability of the projects. And then it was over dinner. They just started kind of probing, what scheduling is, what predictability is. Because the people I was speaking to were some very clever investors, but they weren't project people, they were investors, as in business people who would invest in these projects, etc. And the key thing for me is that it isn't very widely known what actually drives predictability in these projects. Like these are for me, if I was a CEO of one of these large companies and I was about to drop a couple of billion on these projects, I would actually have entire rooms dedicated to each of the 4 points of predictability, and I'd expect to be able to walk in and see where these things are, because it's not the overall spending, it's not the initial upfront cost that's going to kill you, because you'll decide to go ahead with something or not depending on the ROI. It's the variability, which is the predictability of hitting that number that will put you out of a job or not.
The 2 to 4 billion is a big number shift.
Yeah, it's a very big range.
Do you think most people know how likely it is that your project's going to be late?
People don't know. So there's this organization that I've got a very good close friend in the UK called Oxford Global Projects. It's a spin out of the University of Oxford, and they've analysed the predictability of tens of thousands of projects at the top level with business cases. Now, I'm not it's an all-inclusive thing, because what you're actually doing there is you're including the business case forecast, and then you're including the actual what happened in delivery. And some might say, well, that's the most accurate. Well, as we all know, there's political games played with getting a project approved, and then there's actually what you've contracted. Those are 2 very, very different things. But if we just take it for in fact, they've got KPIs for every single industry, and every one of those KPIs is far above the risk levels that we generally simulate. There's projects that are 200-300% over budget and over time on average, that kind of thing in there. From what I see with all the data that we crunch, obviously it's not as, I'd like to say it's not as high as that, but there's what is contracted and what people are expecting to deliver and what actually is delivered are 2 very, very different things. I feel fairly confident standing on a mound of evidence to say that there is generally a large amount of optimism in the world in how fast and how cheaply people think that big things can get done.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what you're saying. Those are the tough conversations to have up front. And then usually there's a mountain of fuzzy historical data that will point people the other, oh, we built that in 12 months.
Yep.
We built that in 14 months. And it's just, it never equates to what really happened because it's usually some fuzzy data, fuzzy schedule, context is missing. The project was given 6 months of buffer to figure it out before they actually started capturing their 12-month timeline. And so you end up, I think these conversations are interesting because I think predictability at any stage of the career, whether you're having those upper level conversations with executives or you're doing more boots on the ground work and looking at more short-term predictability, I think it's just a massive talent to be able to recognize the complete variability that typically happens in the planning cycles. Now, you mentioned the 4 points of predictability. I think you brought it up on the show before. I won't pull up that clip to see if they've changed, but do you want to chat a little bit about the 4 points of predictability?
Sure. So it's taking the opposite view of projects. The current taken for granted philosophy in projects is that project is a unique endeavor. You start with scope and you have all of the different elements of the project management cycle and you go down that way. Actually, I'm taking this from a mathematical point of view. It's genuinely like predictability is a mathematical term. So is acceleration, by the way. If you go into physics, the definition of acceleration is the double differential of position. Very mathematical. So the 4 points of predictability are actually just, if I wanted to engineer predictability in a project, what are the mathematical variables I'd have to play with? Just by the laws of nature, I'd have to play with these things. And it's very simple. The first one is what I'll call node information or task and milestone information. This is what people call scope. So it's what are all the tasks and milestones that I've got to get done, and what is the information sitting within them? And by that I mean things like what is the duration, the resources, any constraints, the equipment, the money associated with them, those kinds of things. The second one is how all of those node structures are connected. So this is the relationship structure. It's, are you doing start to start, finish to finish, finish to start, making sure you've got enough circular logical dependencies, these kinds of things. The third thing is variability in the first two. Now, there's two kinds of variability that people model. They're all just variability. From a mathematics point of view, you've got smooth distribution functions and delta distribution functions. In project language, what you've got, those two, smooth is uncertainty and delta is risk. Technically, they're all the same thing. It's just, it doesn't really matter. But it's essentially how those two wobble or could wobble over time. And then the fourth is system information. And that's the rules by which all the first three sit on top. So a very, very key one there is calendars. So we've all been in this situation whereby something gets pushed out by a day and suddenly the project gets pushed out by 3 months. And it will be the weird alignment of all the calendars for all the different site areas.
Yeah, I'm not buying that one for $1. Usually it's like a couple days. No project you push for a day because of calendar gets pushed through. Maybe that's what the contractor's telling you, but go check your calendars unless you have.
Maybe. It can happen. That can happen in.
Is this a European thing where summers are off and so there's 2 months?
No. If you're doing chip fabs or data centers, it's fine. It's a very, very big thing when it comes to offshore drilling and offshore wind farm building.
He's backtracking, folks. He's backtracking.
No, because you can only access the ships. It's like they're even rarer than cranes. But anyway,
No, I've been places where that you can't. The underground is frozen, so you only have a certain time period, and there's So okay, good catch.
but there's those are the four things, and you've got to. I kind of like when I was having this conversation this week, I kind of flipped the question around and said, let's not try and be as predictable as possible. Let's actually flip it around and say, I want to make the worst, most unpredictable project I possibly can. Well, what would I do? Well,
let me walk
I'd
through this one.
start.
Let me take this one.
Go on.
So I see your 4 points, and let me walk through them and go through a worst possible project. So, number one, task information, aka scope. If I was going to make the worst possible project, I would have a project that is constantly in flux in scope. That way, you could never run out a long-term forecast for it. You're dumping scope into the system. That's creating change as people have to go back through the schedule revision. You have to price out that work. You have to figure out resource availability. You already have in-flight construction probably going on, and that is going to create chaos. So if I was going to do it, I just keep every month. I would be like, here you go, and I'd drop more scope in. Relationship structures. To me, that one would be, that's a tough one, how to make it bad, because I just want to make it good. You know what I mean? What's an example of making relationships? Would that be just
I'll give you a framework that you can figure these out.
Give me a hint.
The what's in the data file and what happens in reality are in no way correlated to each other.
Yeah, gotcha. So I have zero verification of the schedule versus what's in flight. I'd like not have anyone ever walk the job. It would just be, and then no one from the field, no like superintendent would be coming in and actually looking at the schedule and being like, yeah, this is ballpark right. Variability factors, I think that's a pretty easy one. You just don't track them. It's like, it's if you don't track them, it doesn't happen. Right. So you basically you don't even look at any sort of KPIs, any sort of metrics. And then system information, you don't set up the rules. So like when you're talking about calendars, typically an overarching system information, you would set up, here's our 5-day calendar, our 4-day calendar, our 60-hour, 40-hour, 50-hour calendars. And you'd set up the holidays and you'd structure the working days. That can even get into schedule levels as well, too, in my opinion. Like what level is the schedule going to be used at and where? Because you can get, if I wanted to make a really bad schedule, I would have it be like an L4, L5, and P6, and then I'd hire like 2 schedulers to manage it. That'd make a really great schedule. Here's like 150,000 activities, 2 people go, instead of just using the pull planning lean.
Updated once every 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how I would wrap that schedule in a bow and give it to somebody.
So if you think you take those 4 points, and I'll give you a framework in a second, but you take those 4 points, you and I know projects where at least one of those 4 points is true. So it's kind of like, okay, this is really interesting, and management is all sitting there looking at KPIs every single month. Like, are we tracking? Are we doing this? And they're all incentivized. It's just that there's a lack of understanding about how these things work. I'll give you a framework here about how to make them as worse as possible. So to make them absolutely as worse as possible, number one is you just don't do it. It's the fact that what you have in your data set, because your data is what you make judgment from, and what actually you've got happening has no relation at all. So, you've written things in your schedule that people are just not doing, and they're doing different things. Like you said, no one's going to the job site. Relationship structures, you've written things that literally don't correlate. So it's like, why, like, for example, we've got a relationship between painting the fence on the far west wall and putting a bolt, it's just like, how do these things correlate? The variability factors.
My favorite one I found in a schedule one time was they it was a 2-story data center, and they needed to paint down in the first story to install equipment up in the second story.
Okay.
It had nothing
was there
to do with
it. Like,
nothing. No, man. It was like, it just was like someone made just like a bad link, and then no one checked it, and that was like 3 months of schedule savings right there.
There we go.
There's your 3
that is
months.
perfect evidence of these things. So I'd say number one is it's just wrong. Then number two is it's just always in flux. And what I mean by that is, so you actually said something that we could have a very detailed conversation about the scope changing all the time. There's points where some people on project want scope changing all the time, but no one benefits generally from bad change control. So that I'd say bad change control is the same as the first, which is it's just wrong, just fundamentally wrong. So first of all, you've just got it's wrong, and then the second point is they're just too wild. So variability factors, if the variability is massive, it could either take me 1 minute or 17 years to pour concrete. I'm like, I literally can't predict anything from what you've just told me. I can predict that I'm going to have no accurate prediction.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing. And the system information, it's like just wild calendars. Like imagine you've got 1,000 people working on site. Everyone works on a different calendar.
Yeah.
It's just wild.
The biggest ones I see in the calendar usually isn't everyone's working at different calendars, is they just don't use the calendars they have.
Yeah.
So you open up the schedule and it's a standard 40-hour work week. That's like a 5-day work week.
Point number one, it's just wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's like no wrong. Holidays in the calendars, just the stock P6 calendar. And you just sit there and question. Once you see one of those, it's like you just start in your scheduler and you realize that you're in this project and they're just using a stock P6 calendar. You just start to melt because you're like, if they're doing this, what else is wrong? And it's always a lot.
But like these 4 points, like if you think about it, any manager, even someone who's not in projects, can go in there and like you and I have thrown out a couple of examples of where these are checks on how competent people are at the roles they're in. Because ultimately, whether or not you're in scheduling or cost or risk or engineering, ultimately, you say you're going to do something and then you do it. It just is a complex process. And if you can't say what you're going to do and then you don't do what you said you were going to do, that's a bad professional.
Yeah.
And these points associated with scheduling, these are, to me, one of the very first checks of how I check if someone's just a bad scheduler. Like, if they've missed large amounts of scope out of the schedule, or it's just plain wrong, or their relationships are just illogical, or there's their model. A beautiful one is they're modeling variability that's just so not what's happening on the ground.
Greg, there are no bad schedulers. There's just schedulers who haven't listened to enough beyond deadlines.
That is very true. Yes.
Well, so let's shift gears a little bit, because we did put together a little demonstration on how to do variability, just so people can get a sense of some of the very simple math that go through it. And before we shift over, I just want to stress that I think this framework is able to be used at really any level of the project by any role that's available. So if you're looking for something that, hey, how could I start to measure some predictability in my program or start to look at some of these things? I think you could grab a couple points in each of these buckets and start working through them. And again, that's whether you're a junior level scheduler all the way up to senior. I think you just kind of the magnitude and the angles you're looking at changes. Maybe the lenses change a little bit, but the basic principles to me stick very, very well. So this would be, we were talking about variability. And this is one I see all the time. And again, you can don't get so, people love on LinkedIn to get caught up in the pedantic, like, this is exactly how you do it. This is the different ways you do it. And yeah, I'm going to put a disclaimer out here. There's about 10 billion schedule metrics out there that can all be used for something, right? Here's one of them. But I think if you follow through the process and the framework we're thinking about the metric, You can just pick whichever one you like and apply it this way, or you can get as crazy sophisticated as you want, create your own ML curve, to come predict for you, or buy some software that does it for you. But just think about the framework of this. So, what we usually see is you have a activity that has about a 10-day duration, right? What'll happen is it'll complete in 5 days, or an additional 5 days, for a total duration of 15 days, right? And so if you take the total duration of 15 days and you divide it by 10 days, you end up with a score of 1.5. But what this is really telling me is that overall, when somebody predicts something, it takes 50% longer. Now, would we grab one activity in a schedule and do this on? No. You'd grab a huge set, right, to see what it's going through. And you may do some splices as well, right? You could splice out design, permitting, construction, different types of construction. You could go bonkers, like I said before. 1,000 different ways to do this, right? But just getting some sort of, this is roughly how predictable we are in our either durations or starts and finishes or whatever, is a great way to start tracking that variability. And then my favorite one is, once you have like a set of this, is you can start looking at it from a high level perspective. Now, again, this is back of the napkin math, but if you have a 12-month total project duration and you're, doing a 1.5 performance
with
against
zero total flow. Yep.
You have zero float in it. And even if you do have float, you just subtract it off the end. Like, you're going to have an 18-month project. And this is the thing at the beginning, when you're going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, people don't consider this. People really don't think about, they take this initial, hey, someone said it's going to take 12 months. It's going to take 12 months. They don't consider what can potentially happen. And then as you start to execute that project and move forward in it, this is how they never do that extrapolation. You could be doing the wildest EVM project and, be rocking a 0.85, 0.65, but no one's taking that and just dragging it out, being like, well, this is probably where we're going to finish. I see this missing a lot with people and their analysis. People will schedule to their heart's content, but they won't actually turn around and do the predictability analysis.
Do you know what you just put there? This is actually one of my favorite. I've got two favorites in terms of predictability analysis. This is one of them, and the reason why it's one of my favorites is because it concerns the what and not the why. So many people get confused with what and why. So, for example, experienced schedulers listening to this might be thinking, well, it depends on how you determine that duration. Is it a work-based duration, or is it a calendar-based duration? And it's like, it's irrelevant. It's kind of that you're now getting to the why, which is more of the detail. It's the way, this is what I talked about at the end. Flip it on its head. We're looking purely mathematics. We're aiming to get milestones delivered. Milestones are delivered by critical paths, ultimately. Okay? Critical paths depend on flow and activities. Cool. Those activities have durations. I don't really care why something took 15 days. I care that someone told me it would take 10 and it took 15. That's what I care about. And the reason why I love this is it's so simple. It kind of hits right to the top. It's almost the equivalent in business of, when people go that level of detail with me, I'm like, it's almost like saying, oh, well, profit doesn't matter. It's how you got the profit. And I'm like, the payroll at the end of the month would beg to differ what you're about to tell me. What matters is, do I have money and did I make the cash, and do I have the profit to pay people, that kind of thing. So I like that. But by the way, my second is the standard deviation of what you've talked about. So you've got, a 10-day activity that took 15. Let's say you've got 20 of those. I want to know what the standard deviation of that is, because that gives me my range. So, for example, if on average they took 50% longer, but it could range from one was on time to one took 30 days, I'm like, holy shit, that actually matters.
Yeah. Well, let's party. Let's do this. So I just took one of the stock Primavera P6 schedules and threw in, you're missing the column headings here, but we'll get them in a second. They have original duration on your left side, actual duration, and then actual start and finishes, right? And so let's see. I think I might have to actually take another screenshot for the headings. Let me get the headings in
I'm
there.
actually just going to do the standard deviation right now on these.
Well, how about we race? Because I'm going to put it in
share
the
it.
chat.
I can't see the things.
Hold on a second. I'm going to put it into Chat GPT. All right, here.
Oh, that'd beat me. That'd beat me. What's the standard deviation of these figures? By the way, for everyone listening, a standard deviation is essentially
talk the maths.
It's a measure of how different things are from a mean or median. And everyone listening to this has probably heard of 5 sigma. 5 sigma is basically 1 in a million occurrences doesn't fall within your data set. So when people in machining talk about that, they mean they have 1 defect in a million products. One sigma, from the top of my mind, I think it's about 67%. So it would be that 67% of all occurrences are within that boundary. 2 sigmas like 97%. So, now I personally take one standard deviation, and rather than 2, and I do that because standard deviation enforces a bell-shaped curve on things, and actually projects work in long-tail curves. So basically, you're trying to smash a circle into a square, and we laugh at babies when they do that. So let's not do it here. That's why I said, look, it's a very simple KPI, but it gets the job done on the most basic bit. Right. So what's the standard deviation of that data set?
It's here we go. Above is my construction schedule. I don't think it. Here we'll do. Can you provide? Would it be the standard deviation between actual and original duration?
Yes.
Or would it just be,
it would be
between actual and original duration? If I could spell duration right. Ooh, maths. Going much faster than Greg right now.
Well, I don't. Okay, 8.5 days. 8.5 days. Okay, but we need to know what the average is to know if that's significant at all.
What's the average? How would I word this? What's the average?
What's the average actual duration?
Wait. Do you want the actual average duration or the average of the actual to original variance?
No, I want the I'm being a bit particular. I actually want what's the average actual duration, because the standard deviation essentially is the wobble around that. And then what we need is...
Yeah, I see what you're doing now.
Right, so there you go. So the average duration is 21.6 days. The standard deviation is, what was it, 8.5?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, that means within this bell-shaped curve that they could take as little as 21 minus 8, which is 13 days, and as much as 21 plus 8, which is, with the decimal points, 30 days. So you've actually got a range of 13 to 30 days. That's not a small variance. That's a very significant variance. Now, how many schedules do you see where so what's the... Can you just do one final thing? What is the average baseline duration?
This would be original duration in our case because we don't have a baseline. Ooh, what happened? There we go. Just taking a second. We wanted to give you a head start, Greg.
15. Okay. So the average original duration. So what we've got is the average original duration is 15, but from what we've just seen, it can go up to 30. How many projects have you and I seen where the float is the same size for every single activity as the actual duration of the activity itself? That'd be ridiculous if you put that schedule together. People would say, we're not going to be in business if you do that. So it's interesting to see that is what actually happens.
Yeah. I think people, I just don't think at this point in time, people have a strong enough understanding that how late projects can get. It's just, and a lot of the solutions we're seeing today, what I see a lot of is, you need lean, you need pole planning, you need production planning,
terrible ideas.
You need visual. It's stuff we pitch too. You need visual-based productivity. You need software analysis like nodes and links. You need all these things, but these things only really help you. The vast majority of their help come after there's been way too many things already decided. And I've written so many articles and spoke so often on you want to improve the performance of construction. Like, just get better at picking dates. It circles all the way back to that conversation you're having with that CEO. They're going to go pick construction dates. Most likely, most businesses pick that information without having any they're just picking off of business demand. They're just looking out there in the calendar saying, oh yeah, we need, it was like last week we had Matt on. Hey, we need 10,000 beers here, like finish the factory here. Whether from here to here actually matches your duration of being able to deliver, it doesn't.
I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that because my experience of business is that it's not as simple as that kind of black and white, in that you can rely on the ingenuity and the efforts of people, and to be honest, you can actually just throw money at the problem. If you told me a date I had to get something done by and gave me unlimited money, as long as the date wasn't practically impossible.
If I had a unicorn sitting next to me that coughed out perfect schedules, I could use P6.
Yeah. True. I think the big thing here,
unlimited money. Was this a James Bond movie?
The big thing here, though, is that
I'll build a laser on the moon.
The predictability equation is just the 4 predictability factors. You can apply it to every single project that exists, and you can set up some very simple KPIs. The one, if I could snap my fingers and get one wish, my one wish would be next to the dates that are being forecast by the team in a project, I would only want 2 numbers. Everything else can go away. All these Power BI dashboards, delete every single one of them. I just want the key dates of the milestones. I want the average productivity. And I want standard deviation. And with those, and underneath those, my good scheduling team would have told me my limits. So with all the Monte Carlo simulations, it's not, what are we going to do? I've got no interest in what people think might possibly be true on Mars. I have no interest. I care about my limits. So it's almost like, how fast can I run this engine until it blows up in my face? Of that productivity, I want to know the number. So let's say you've just told me the productivity, is 0.15 there. So they're going. But if my limit is 0.8, I'm fine. I'm like, cool, we're less productive than I thought, but, things aren't going to blow up in my face yet. The standard deviation as well. How big can that be until things blow up in my face? So the standard deviation here, we'll do a divide in it. It'd probably be about 0.5, something like that. If the limit is 0.2, I already know that, this thing's going to blow up in my face. And those things to me are so important because you can actually put management action against them. I can have a predictability team. I can say, why is that number 0.5? Well, because
that's
of
good.
the permitting
predictability team.
And I could go into that department and find out why the variability is so large. And then a week later they come back, it's so large because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, how do I fix this right now before this becomes a cancer? And that's all I'd have. And this ultimately was the conversation I was having with this CEO. I was like, I don't care what imaginary scenarios people have envisaged. I care, by the rules of physics and projects, what is my limit when I get killed? And I just need to make sure I stay away from that limit. That's all. It's almost like management in reverse. People are trying to do the best project. I'm trying to not have the worst project. And that would be my I found this to be quite a contrarian view, but it's
The predictability team is super interesting to me because we've talked about it before, but we have such specialization within project management and project controls that your planning and scheduling team, you just assume they're doing predictability. And your project manager, you assume, is predictability. You have all these assumptions in there about who is managing predictability. But if you just had one team that's sole goal in life was to make your projects more predictable, and they force that, it's putting your money where your mouth is. It's focusing and investing on what's important.
Totally.
And then the other
sorry to interrupt. To your point, it's to people who will counter this and go, well, it's the project manager's responsibility is predictable, and I would caveat this with, we live in the real world and not the dream world. People have,
except for
really
my unicorn sitting
jobs
next to me now that schedules
for your unicorn. People have really difficult jobs, and if you think that people are going to be thinking about second order effects when they're struggling to do the first thing, it won't ever happen. And to think that people are deep specialists in every single area of a generalist job, you're barking up the wrong tree. So
there's a bit of a bias there as well too. Like if you were on this project and you were having this done, I 100% guarantee I would sit down with the people in foundation phase 1, and let's say there's 10 phases after this, and they're like, we just got a slow start, but we'll improve. We'll get it better. It'll change. I'm operating almost 50% over every single thing I estimate, but it's going to get better. And I've seen it get better, but not to the point where if this was a 0 total float schedule, it's going to pull the way back in, because you actually have to start performing at like a 0.5 at some point to actually pull in all that time you've lost. And if you have float, you've ate it up. And so that's, to me, I think that's gotten my brain going this morning.
Well, I'll add a second thing in there about this predictability, because I've actually started to see a lot of the very big players in the industry actually develop predictability teams. They're normally physicists, because it's a mathematical thing, because predictability and acceleration are physics terms. The second thing is having a predictability team in the central department can do two things. Number one, it can tell you if problems are systemic, because people on a single project don't know if the problem they have is across everybody or just theirs. And systemic problems, to be honest, are not really the job of the individual project. Systemic problems are the job of the PMO sitting across all the projects. So, for example, it could be that you're just letting out terrible contracts, or there's an unintended consequence from some of the terms in the contracts that you're putting out, which is causing systemic issues.
Yeah, your subcontractors come in and they have no pull planning, production planning, lean system that they implement to do their daily task planning. Like you show up to site and that's not present, you're going to have a bad time.
Exactly. And then the second component is you can throw people into an environment where that people won't have time. So if you think about this, if predictability is terrible, people are going to be working round the clock just trying to fight fires. When you resource a project, you don't resource the worst case scenario, you resource the average scenario. So if people are already fighting fires, how much time are they going to have to really sit down and think? So to be able to parachute in 20 people and almost double the capacity of the team, that's going to, first of all, help put the fires out and then help mitigate future fires, as opposed to, I don't know, guys, you're going to have to solve it yourself, really.
Well, you get to a certain point where the bow wave, the tidal wave gets to be so large that no one will ever ride it. That you just can't ride out that sort of. Well, Greg, we've broke a record here today. I think we've been unpredictable, and we've created our longest episode on the predictability episode.
Well, we never actually forecasted anything, did we? This is, I think what we've come down to, this is actually, you and I are just having a free conversation here, and I think the key thing is that you and I have seen such varying, it's actually understanding, it's not quality, it's understanding, because the literature, I have never seen a quality piece of predictability literature come out of any of the governing bodies of project management. And by quality piece of literature, I mean very clear guidance on what are the predictability factors, what's the philosophy by which I should be thinking about these things, such as I should be thinking about preventing the worst rather than hoping for the best, and then actually going
communication, synergy, teamwork, effort, hard work by our software.
Yeah. But there we go. I think this is something that does actually really need to be fixed. Does actually really need to be fixed in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Greg, we probably should wrap this up because we've gone massively over time and budget, which I think is good for this episode. Any final thoughts? Actually, you don't get any final thoughts. We're just going to close this one out. Sorry, you've gotten.
Yeah,
check out Greg's 4 points of predictability early in the show. Definitely try to do some schedule analysis in ChatGPT. I find it super interesting to run the calculations and see how they come out. You can just move faster and go faster. Remember, if you do ChatGPT Teams, your data stays private and you can go find other ways to go do it if your company is blocking it. The schedule I use today is a stock Primavera P6 schedule, which you can download Primavera P6 for free, and you can go experiment all that you want to. So for us at Beyond Deadlines, if you found this interesting, if you know a CEO or just someone who wants to improve predictability, please share the episode with them and go hit that subscribe button. But for us at Beyond Deadlines, have a great week and go make your projects more predictable.